ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.
Welcome everyone to the Town of Arlington Redevelopment Board meeting on December 16th, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Rachel Zemberry. I'm the chair of the board. Could I please ask the other members introduce themselves this evening?
Steve Revelak, good evening.
Eugene Benson.
Shayna Corman-Houston.
And we also have joining us this evening the Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development, Claire Ricker.
Thank you.
Let's move to our first agenda item for tonight, which is a review of the meeting minutes from December 2nd, 2024, to see if there are any additions or corrections, starting with Ken.
None.
Steve?
None.
Jean?
None.
Shayna?
None.
Let's see if there is a motion to approve the meeting minutes as submitted.
So motion.
Second.
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve.
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Shayna?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. The meeting minutes from December 2nd have been approved. We'll now move to our second agenda item, which is a discussion, a discussion with any individuals or town bodies who wish to bring a warrant article to 2025 town meeting related specifically to the zoning bylaw. And I'll turn it over to Director Ricker for any comments before we'll move to the first individual who has contacted us this evening.
Sure, great. I have not been contacted by individual members of the community who have expressed interest in putting forth a zoning warrant article for this year's town meeting. I have talked with Chair Klein about the ZBA, and they have a few articles they're looking to advance, but I believe the folks here tonight are likely here as a result of the community outreach that we did around this meeing.
Could you speak up a little? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Or you know what?
Why don't you move, if anyone who came here, if you could please move forward. Thank you.
Citizen petition. Oh, for the that's right. So I have not received any correspondence really other than from a property owner who wishes to have his property included in the MBTA communities overlay. So I'm thinking tonight it's just going to be, we'll call on members of the audience who potentially have a zoning warrant article. And we could likely start with Chairman Klein from the ZBA.
Great, thank you very much. Why don't we, if you wouldn't mind joining us, that would be great.
Can I just ask for clarification? Like you're talking about what you're planning for the future. When you're talking about warrant articles, so I wanted to bring something up to town meeting. I didn't know there was a deadline for the warrant article.
No, let me clarify. This is only so anyone who is interested in a warrant article that is specifically related to the zoning bylaws, those need to go through this, the redevelopment board. Ultimately, the redevelopment board will hold a hearing and either support or not support that article. So this is really to have a discussion with the board if there is something that any member is contemplating. If it is related to anything else for town meeting, then that is not what we are discussing this evening.
So I have an issue with zoning.
Okay, then so if I could ask you to please hold that. We will first be speaking with the chairperson of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then I will ask for any member of the public who wishes to speak. We will give those individuals up to 2 minutes to present what they are thinking about to the board, and then we will open it up to the board for any comments, but we will not debate or deliberate. We will just provide feedback this evening. Is that clarified?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank Steve Revelak for coming to ZBA's meeting last week. It was really informative to have him present some of the questions regarding the changes in the accessory dwelling unit at the state level that will impact locally what our bylaw has. So there were a few things that the board were interested in bringing forward to having the ARB consider. The first has to do with the difference between building coverage and lot coverage. So building coverage is a term that is defined and it is used once, which is in the definition of the vehicular oriented business district. We use the term lot coverage a lot and we never define it. So we don't know if it's the same thing as building coverage, if there's additional things that are supposed to be covered in lot coverage that aren't covered. So that's something that we think would be a simple clarification that could be brought up at town meeting this year, just to simplify what that means.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Absolutely.
And then, do you mind if we take them one at a
No, go right
time?
ahead.
Do you have anything
Absolutely.
else on that particular
Nope, that's-
topic? Great. Does the zoning board of appeals have a recommended definition that you would want to put forward for
We have
that?
sort of been using the terms interchangeably because there's no other guidance.
Okay,
So it should definitely include both primary buildings and accessory buildings. The bigger question comes in whether driveways are considered covered land or not.
okay.
You know, in some jurisdictions it would be considered, in some it's not, but I don't know what the opinion in the town is on that question.
Okay. Does the zoning board of appeal have an opinion or a practice that they're currently using?
So essentially, right now, we're using the definition of building coverage for lot coverage.
Okay. So that would not then include driveways?
So it would not include
Okay.
driveways now.
Great. Any other members of the board have any thoughts, questions for Christian about that particular topic? Steve?
No, I think this sounds like a reasonable clarification.
Jean? Shana? Good?
No.
Great. So in our board retreat on Saturday, the board discussed that we would certainly be willing to take this one up and have a discussion about reviewing that warrant article language once that's put together for submission in January. Great. And I believe you had one or two other topics.
So the other topic that came up, apart from the accessory dwelling units, which I assume you folks are on top of, and which
Yes.
Steve will be talking to you folks about.
But I do have some questions for you on that, so we'll come back to
Okay.
ADUs.
So one thing we talked about last year at this time was overhauling the section on parking in residential districts. I don't think much headway has been made in that regard to date. One thing that's come up for us recently, the second paragraph of that section, which is 6110A, has to do with second driveways being allowed by special permit. There are three findings that the board is required to make in that regard. Is that we have to find that it avoids undue concentration of population, that it allows for adequate provision of transportation, and conserves the value of land and buildings in the vicinity. We sort of find these findings as not being overly helpful in terms of what really is at hand when we're talking about second driveways on properties. Having a second driveway doesn't change the population on the property at all, so that one never really comes into consideration. Allows for an adequate provision of transportation. People can have cars on one driveway, they can have cars on two driveways, so that really doesn't affect anything either. It really comes down to, does it conserve the value of land and buildings in the vicinity? And that's sort of a very nebulous
Right.
thing. So I don't know if that's something that can be handled between now and when things need to be submitted to for town meeting, but I think it would be helpful to have a better sense as to what really qualifies as a reason for having a second driveway. I will say they primarily come up in projects that are existing two-family dwellings that are being converted to two condominiums by a developer. That's primarily, almost exclusively when they arise.
Great. Any thought on this item, starting with Ken?
No.
Steve?
I agree, recalling my time on the ZBA, I agree with the chair that the requirements as stated in the bylaw are nebulous and not necessarily relevant. And I mean, my recollection was that traffic circulation and safety was really a more important consideration. And, you know, maybe we could better, maybe that could be better reflected. Thank you.
Jean?
So all of those condo conversions where they want a second driveway, does the ZBA usually say yes or no? What's that?
We're about probably 2/3 yes.
And when you say no, why do you say no?
Sometimes it really just comes down to the amount of space that's on the property, that it would just be such an imposition on the abutting neighbors. Sometimes it has to do with what street in particular that secondary driveway is being proposed for, and if it's, you know, on a walking path to a school, or there are some other, if it's very close to an intersection, those are sort of the cases where it really becomes an issue.
So are those the criteria you'd like to see get added to
So,
the zoning bylaw?
One thought we had was this is possibly something that the transportation planner can take a look at and sort of see if there are really, because the imposition on the property is something we can sort of handle, but sort of where it comes to the interface with pedestrian ways and the roadways, I think having the input from the transportation planner would be very helpful in how to assess that.
Thanks.
Gina?
I think Jean spoke to my question. It would be great to have some feedback on the criteria that you're looking to.
So for this one, Christian, and I think for the first one, in the past, the ZBA has, I think, come forward with some proposed language. Is that?
We can certainly do that. We can certainly provide that for you.
I think that would probably be helpful,
Okay.
and we can take a look at that on in our next meeting.
Okay.
On the 13th of January,
Okay.
and that way we could decide on any modifications. If that works for you, I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you're
no,
available for that
I mean, I can
meeting.
certainly do it. The board isn't set to meet between now and then, but I can certainly sit down with the vice chair and
Okay.
we can put together.
If you
language
wouldn't
for
mind, I think that would
No,
be
no, no,
helpful,
no.
and then that we would be voting to move forward or to not move forward any zoning warrant articles on in our meeting on our following meeting, the last meeting in
27th.
January. Thank you, the 27th.
Yeah.
Write those dates down. Great. Did you have
Quick
any?
comment, one.
Yep.
These are for regions to allow 2 driveways, right?
Correct.
Correct.
And they have to meet these criteria in order for that to be allowed. That's what we're trying to set up right now.
Right, so that because it's a special permit.
Yep. Okay, I said that. Yep.
The only other ones I had, I know I've been working with Ricker on the artist mixed use. That was something that had been passed by the town meeting a couple of years ago. There are certain requirements that are required to be met that require documentation that is not available. And I understand that the documentation has been, for the most part, put together. I can't find it anywhere. So if it has been approved by the ACAC, that's something that they need to publicize, so people are aware of how to qualify for that. And then Stephen said he might have some questions about accessory dwelling units.
Yep. Did you want to jump into the accessory dwelling unit
Sure.
discussion?
Yeah, and there's sort of 2 pieces of background information I've been working from when looking at this. One is the Attorney General's Municipal Law Unit decision on Article 27 from the Springtown meeting, and also earlier this month, HLC produced draft regulations. This is 760 CMR 71 for how the ADU provisions of 48 Section 3 should be interpreted. So the couple of areas I think we need to address are, one is our requirement for an affidavit that the owner will occupy the ADU or primary structure at the time the certificate of occupancy is issued. That's something we can no longer do. The section immediately afterwards, so the section I was just referring to is 510-2C1.
510-2C1. Okay, thank you.
Now the next section, 510-2C2, has an exception to 510-2C1, and that exception will probably be rendered moot. The regulations have the notion of something called a protected use ADU, which essentially means the first accessory dwelling unit on a parcel. They also have there's also a section of the guidance that say that accessory dwelling units, a special permit shall be required for accessory dwelling units which are not protected use ADUs. So we will probably have to capture that distinction. And the one remaining piece is the special permit requirement when an accessory dwelling unit is within 6 foot or 6 feet of a lot line.
Great.
And because we are not allowed to impose special permit requirements, we'll need to change something there. During our discussion, I believe one member of the ZBA sort of expressed an opinion that the intent of the state ADU regulations are to make it easier to construct ADUs, and his encouragement was to take what we're doing by special permit and to allow it by right.
For those that are within 6 feet of the lot line. Yep.
And I believe the chair had, if it's okay, had suggested possibly incorporating some of the requirements. So another bylaw section 542C7. So those are setback exceptions for garages with type 1 or type 2 construction.
Yep.
And perhaps we could, make the requirement such that, within 6 feet it must be type 1 or type 2, or something to that effect.
Okay.
That's I think that was the general gist of our ADU discussion.
Okay. Anything else, Christian, that you'd want to add to that?
So basically with the, if we remove the provision for a special permit, then there's just sort of a couple different things that could happen. It could just be that you could build up to the property line. It could be that you can't build beyond 6 feet, which is closer than 6 feet, which is the current bylaw. In some regards for accessory structures. Accessory structures that are larger than 80 square feet can't be within 6 feet of a property line. But it would also make it, if you have an existing garage, you wouldn't be able to convert it. So we need to come up with a standard for how to make this work. And we don't have an opinion as to whether converting an existing structure to an accessory dwelling unit or removing that structure and building a new structure, that would be an accessory dwelling unit. We don't have an opinion as to whether there should be a differentiation between those two things. Where we are talking about building residential structures immediately adjacent to the property line, it may make sense to have a discussion with emergency services in town for how proper life saving would work in a structure that's close to the property line, where they may not necessarily be able to access the structure adequately from different sides, or if they have to change the mode of attack for whatever service they're providing, it may be difficult to come all the way around to the backside of the block.
Great. One of the things that we were discussing was creating warrant article language such that we identify the requirements to bring this section in compliance with state laws and regulations, which would then allow us a little bit more time, I think, to work through the specificities. So I think that's, unless the board members have any other thoughts, that's how we were looking at creating the warrant language for this particular article.
I just have one question. You guys are talking about if structures are within 6 feet of the property line, and you're saying that the structure has to be a certain type. I think Steve said one I
one or
prefer-
two.
Yeah.
There's a section 542B7.
Is that zoning or is that building code?
So that's the zoning code, has a section on garages that allows you to build a garage closer than 6 feet to the property line as long as you meet certain requirements for fire protection.
That's because you can't get all the way around the system.
Right.
So usually fire treated wood and non-combustible siding. But that's also in the building code.
Correct. Building code, I think, is 5 feet.
Yes. So we have to look at that
Right.
more because I think that supersedes anything.
No, absolutely.
So if we're gonna start, I just want to look at that because right now, I've never looked at it in terms of zoning when I go that close. It was always in the past what meets the building code.
Right.
And that's why it's non-combustible. You can't get around all sides.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question, or you don't
Nope,
do that in the
we're
middle?
not doing that right now. Thank
Okay.
you. Sheena?
Not at this time.
Great. Jean?
I just took a very quick read through the draft regulations, and it seems that there are one or two places where the town has options about what to do. So I don't think it's as easy as we'll just conform.
Absolutely.
We'll have to figure out what to do about the options and what to present to town meeting about the options. And I'll have to read it again. I didn't come away in my initial, and I just skimmed it, with the idea that there could never be special permits for ADUs, but the special permits would have to sort of conform to when there'd be special permits regularly for structures. So I think maybe I misread that, because again, I just skimmed it, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than no special permits.
I agree with you, Jean, and I think Steve, for example, pointed out one of the places within the state's wording where special permits would be required, which is, again, the protected versus non-protected. So I agree with you. I think that there's more nuance in here, and that we should have the time to dig into that to ensure that, again, anything, I think, again, that what we need to make sure is that we are looking for anything that is specifically not congruent with the state regulations. And you're absolutely right, there may be multiple pathways to do that. Great. Let's see, the other item, Christian, that was brought up by this board recently, again at our board retreat on Saturday, was about the current homes that abut the bike path that are in residential districts, 1 or 2 family homes that currently are coming in front of the redevelopment board, which require a special permit, which clearly are much more aligned with the types of applications that the ZBA typically is responsible for reviewing. And the board wanted to speak with you to see if, and again, I know you can't speak for the ZBA,
Sure.
not having had a meeting when we're asking this question, but that it seems like it would make more sense to ensure that those are seen by the ZBA for continuity, again, in the typology of the application. And so we were looking at potentially making that change to the bylaws. So I wanted to see if you had any immediate concerns. Obviously, we have time until the end of January to decide whether or not this is a warrant article we're making. Jean, it sounds like you have some additional clarification.
I think what we had talked about, to give it a little more nuance, that this would just be 1 and 2 family homes in the R1 and R2 districts, so it wouldn't be in the industrial district or larger properties.
R0 and any contact.
I don't think so. Yeah.
But yeah, certainly I think anything that's R0 or R1 or 2 that abuts the bike path really doesn't require full EDR.
Right, that was this board's feeling, especially after having seen a significant increase in those over the past year. So if that's something that I think if you wouldn't mind when you have your board convened to see if there is any discussion around, I think this board would appreciate any feedback that the ZBA might have.
Absolutely.
Great. Any other thoughts on your end? And I'll see if anyone on the redevelopment board has any other warrant article topics to discuss with Christian and the
That's
ZBA?
everything we had from this year.
Okay. Great. That's
Appreciate
plenty.
your time, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Really appreciate it. Okay. The redevelopment board also had an email today which is listed as correspondence from Susan Stamps, who I believe is here. So I'd like to invite Susan Stamps to speak with the redevelopment board about a proposal for a modification, and I apologize, I just need to go to that reference item. So there was a proposal about a modification to section 6.3 related to public shade trees. So Susan, the floor is yours, and as I mentioned, I'm not sure if you were here yet, what I will do is allow anyone who has a proposed zoning article is to, request that you start within up to 2 minutes. It may not take that long because obviously you've already written this out for us, but love to hear what you're thinking and then we can have a discussion.
Thank you. So last year, the town meeting passed the warrant article which requires a developer to plant a street tree every 25 feet in front of a project, either in the tree strip or if the tree strip is not available, then in a tree well on the sidewalk. And some of us on the tree committee were talking about it, and we realized, we can take a vote or anything, but just in informal discussion, we realized that there's one situation which is not accounted for in the bylaw, and that's where there's no tree strip and there's no sidewalk, or the sidewalk is, the tree strip is there but it's too compromised and narrow, or the sidewalk is there and it's too narrow to fit a tree well and still let people comfortably walk by. And so in that case, we remembered that our state public shade tree law, chapter 87 of the general laws, allows planting of a public tree, planting by the tree warden, who's in charge of planting public trees, of a tree on private property within 20 feet of the public way, which means you have the street, you have the tree strip, then you have the sidewalk, and then you have the part of the sidewalk that's closest to the building. That's what we call the back of the sidewalk. 20 minutes from there into the sidewalk, into the property, the tree warden can plant a tree. And so it immediately, it's really up to the town how it wants to handle it. Right now, the tree committee and the tree warden and Mike Rademacher are putting together a program for starting this back of the sidewalk planting, and we've got a contract that we're going to have with the homeowner and all kinds of protections, and we're going to have contractors do the work and all that sort of thing. But coming back to 6.3, we suggest that the town, that you integrate that same idea, that if there's no tree strip available and the sidewalk isn't available, then to plant it on the property. They would still have within 20 feet, and that they would still have the same obligations to keep water for 3 years and that sort of thing, and use the tree list and the tree warden and all the other protections that's already in 6.3.
Great. Thank you very much for bringing this forward. Let's see, so what we're doing this evening, and this is for everybody, is to provide some initial feedback and thoughts to consider. We won't be debating, rendering any type of, obviously there is a whole process for submission of the warrant articles and then hearings, but just so that everybody understands that. But really just to provide some questions for any members of the public wishing to submit articles. So with that, I will see Jean if you have any initial thoughts, and we'll run through and see if any other members of the board do as well.
I do have a few initial thoughts. One is the current standard is that street trees be planted within the planting strip or in sidewalk tree wells where there aren't planting strips. So some of that I think is taken care of, but also importantly, the bylaw currently says when there's no other suitable location within the public way, shade trees may be proposed in locations within the lot, or in exceptional circumstances, they can be a financial contribution to the Arlington Tree Fund. So I think we tried to deal with that last time, and my concern with what we saw was that it didn't take into account places that are allowed to be right up to the lot line, where there is no place, and you're creating an impossible situation under those circumstances. The other thing I'll just mention, it's not quite related to yours, but I don't think, I have a hard time seeing how we need what you're suggesting, and it does have a flaw, I think what's not happening, at least as I walk around my neighborhood, is that new single-family homes are getting built and trees aren't getting planted out front, and though that is required to have trees, it's not limited to commercial. And I don't know whether the inspectional services is checking on that, or that's one thing that the tree committee can do, because there are 2 or 3 or 4 new houses I walk by in my neighborhood that have been built within the past 6 months to a year that don't have the trees that are required by this standard, and those do have the places to put the trees. So I think maybe the tree committee might want to have a little conversation with inspectional services about that. That's my gratuitous extra.
Great, thank you, Jean. Steve?
Yeah, thank you for your including some of the excerpts from Chapter 87 in your correspondence. I see that in order for the tree warden to plant a tree within private property, they do need the owner's permission, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of if such a tree were to be planted, and after some number of years it becomes infected or in poor health and needs to be taken down, would the owner then have to go before the select board for a tree hearing?
No, our thought, we grappled with that in thinking what's going to be the program that will roll out, and we realized that once the tree's on the property, that's it. We can't be policing what they do with the tree.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's just one of those, like little
Yes.
niches. Nothing else, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Shayna?
One is I would love to see examples of communities that have tried something like this. The other is sort of following up on Steve's question. I'm wondering, would this be part of a landscape plan for a property owner developing it? So, for example, if an owner was required to do any number of things on their own property, could this count towards, could their street tree, their back of the sidewalk street tree, be counted toward their other landscape requirements, even though it was provided by the town? Would that be reducing their requirements, reducing the benefit that the town got? So,
Are you talking like buffer requirements in the zoning bylaw, that sort of thing?
yep, or tree replacement, removal and replacement, things like that. So,
I would say probably no, in that this would be the, well, okay, I mean, the program we're talking about, that the town is rolling out at some soon. Those that are, they would be street trees if they were grown in front of the house to put the tree, and that's why it's going on the property. As far as putting this in this bylaw, 6.3, I think that would be up to the ARB. I mean, if they decide to cite the trees, like they can't put the trees on the tree strip or on the sidewalk, and they have to put it on property, then it would be up to the ARB to decide if that would count towards whatever screening they need. I think it would. I have no idea. That's a good question.
Anything else, Shana? Okay, Ken?
I think my two questions are sort of aligned with Jean's question. It's for new construction, and you have, I don't know how you came up with 20 feet. You have to look at what the setbacks are and look at all the different considerations, and I don't want having trees as a requirement that would curtail development of housing or new buildings because we have to put a tree there. There's other, I'm just saying, you know, there's other vehicles of getting trees, like putting a fund in for plant trees elsewhere, so it compensates for that kind of stuff. But that, and also we're in certain areas where we're trying to build lively streets, so where the ground floor might have more interaction with the sidewalk, trees may become a hindrance to that interaction. I just want you to look at that and sort of address that a little. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm saying, can you guys look at those two instances there, okay? And then also, you also made a comment saying that once the trees are planted, it's the owner's tree now. So it's just, so if that tree falls on somebody, the liability is now on the ownership.
The contract we put together that we're going to be using with the homeowners, the tree, like Redevelopment was okay, says basically that once the tree is on the property, they have to take care of it for a year, and they have to take care of it, and after a year it belongs to them.
Which is,
yeah.
but then what if the contract also turns around, cuts it all down? Then it's gone.
Yeah.
But you now did this, and now it's you know, I read thinking of something a little more permanent. If it's a strong concern, and we want to look at this, then let's make sure that it's not a one year kind of deal where you know make all this effort to put a tree there, and after a year, also the owner decides, I don't want no tree here, and they cut it down, or they don't take care of it anymore. It just dies, and then they say, okay, it's a dead tree, cut it down.
I think that's a great point. And would I love to require people, contractors, to plant trees on private property and individual house projects? I really would. So far, that argument's gone nowhere with anyone. But basically what you're talking about is, this is something that, yeah, they have to be responsible for.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying you should look into that and address that issue. I'm not saying they should.
No, I know that, but you're saying they need to be responsible.
We need to look at that if you can make them plant trees there.
And I'm just going to state that I'm aligned with Jean. I do feel that this is already covered in the zoning bylaw, and my concern in reading this was, again, creating an impossible situation where the setback is not 20 feet, and now we have a requirement that we need to issue relief for within the zoning bylaw when we have a vehicle to already require trees in different configurations, without creating a situation where somebody who has a building that is pulled up more than 20 feet to the lot line now is in violation of a section of the bylaw.
I just say, I didn't mean that it needs to be 20 feet in. I'm just saying it's somewhere in the first 20 feet.
And again, where you're up to the lot line, there's no opportunity.
Well,
So
yes,
automatically
of
you're,
course.
so
If
again, I
it's
think we have to
available.
think through all of those
Yeah.
scenarios in order to consider that.
Okay,
So
well,
I just,
we'll
want
look
that's,
at it.
that's the feedback that,
Yes.
any other feedback on this item? Okay, great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, are there any other members of the public joining us this evening who have a warrant article that they would like, that they're contemplating proposing, that they'd like to speak with the board about? Please, if I could ask you to come over here.
Sure. And I apologize for not sending anything. I'm still trying to
So if I could ask
figure
you.
out the best way to word it.
Sure, understood, and that's fine. That's certainly
Yeah.
something we can support you with. So if you could please introduce yourself by
Sure.
your first, last name, and address.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to remind everyone, I'll provide up to 2 minutes for you to talk to us about what you're thinking. We'll provide you feedback, and again, this won't be a deliberation. Just this is the board's initial feedback
Yeah.
for your idea.
Thank you. My name's Karen Samuelson. I live at 18 Tower Road. I think I sent all of you a blog I wrote on Arlington or something. I'm really concerned about lack of single-family housing for affordable housing for anyone who is young and wants to buy a house or downsize. And I know that Winchester has a moratorium on tear downs, and it's too late for us, but a huge monstrosity was built with a 10-foot setback, which I believe that the state allows now. I didn't know that Arlington automatically allowed it, and there's this huge monstrosity. It's asymmetrical. And they say it's 2.5 stories. I'm sorry, it's at least 3. It goes way out to the side. It's a nightmare. And I thought, no, this can't be happening. Like this has got to be wrong. So I went down to the inspection board several times. Okay, so it does fit all the zoning. So that made me think, what the hell? And then I started talking to people, and everyone knows it's happening all over the place. So I feel like I wish there was a way to address it. I don't know the best way, if it's a moratorium or what, to try to preserve some of the single or smaller homes, because everyone knows they get built up. They're a couple $1 million, nobody can afford them. So I know we talk about affordable housing on this end and, building up the whole MBTA affordable housing idea. But on the other side, I couldn't afford to downsize, in Arlington, and I know my son couldn't afford to buy here. So I feel like that doesn't get paid any attention to. And I know many people whose houses, the views have been destroyed, and there's no more privacy. And we all pay heavy taxes here.
Yeah.
And now I can see my neighbors flossing,
Right.
although they haven't moved in. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of a moratorium. I know that was presented a few years ago. I know it didn't pass, but I
Yep.
think there's a lot more people now who are affected, who are aware of it, and who don't like it.
Sure. So are you specifically asking the board for feedback on the idea of a moratorium?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's something we can respond to.
Yeah.
And again, since this is the first time we're hearing it this evening, it may be some initial thought and feedback. But we will, take some initial thoughts from members of the board. And we'll start, Ken, with you.
Well, you started off with what you said earlier. This is first I'm hearing it, okay, so you said that it has to be more affordable small houses made available. And I think putting a moratorium on housing,
Tear downs. The wings where they say they're reconstructing.
let me finish, okay?
Yeah.
A moratorium on building new houses, okay? I'm not sure how that works, because I'm a simple believer on supply and demand. If the supply is very low and the demand is very high, prices go up. Okay, so you're not going to get, if you put a moratorium on housing, no new houses,
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
So I'm sorry.
Talking about tear downs, not
You know
no new
what,
houses.
what I would, yeah, again, we're not going to go through a
Oh,
debate. What I
okay.
would just like to do, and again, because you're coming with a seed of an idea,
Yeah.
what I would just like to do is to get the feedback from the board on
I just
that
wanted to
idea.
be clear what I was saying. Yeah.
Well, it's
Great.
coming to me that way right now, okay? So I would suggest if you want to present this as a zoning article, then I would be more clear, so you say, what you're trying to address is not that, okay? But I'm just saying, what I'm hearing from you is, what I'm hearing from you is that you want to limit supply because of new houses, so there's not gonna be no new houses. And but I don't see how you're gonna get lower prices and make it more affordable because of supply and demand. That's as simple as that. And then other things you have to look at too. Older homes are not as efficient as newer homes. So we are trying to be more energy conscious now. We're trying to switch to all electricity, get away from gas, get away from all these other things.
Again, let
I'm
him
not
just,
arguing with you, okay?
let him just provide you
Okay,
feedback, please,
I'm
okay?
just
This is an
bringing up these
opportunity.
issues.
Well,
Again, please just take this in the spirit it's intended.
Yes.
We're trying
Okay.
to provide you with feedback
yeah.
on the idea and
I got
all
it,
the
I got
different
it. I'll
issues
shut up. I'll
that you need to consider.
I'll zip it.
So that's something you should address too, okay? Because newer homes are more efficient, they use less electricity, and also having more housing closer deals with less transportation because people are living closer to where they work, where they eat, and where they shop. Because what you're saying is, don't stop building here, build further out. That could be an interpretation there, and then that's also contrary to us. We're trying to look at communities where you stay, within 20 minutes of where you live. You eat, work, shop, do whatever you want to do, instead of having to get in the car and driving an hour to work, driving an hour to shopping, because that's where the land is available right now. We're a very dense state, and it's very dense. So I'm just looking at when you start talking about moratorium on housing and development, you have to look at those things, address that stuff, and say, look, we've looked at all this stuff here. Here's some, I'm not saying it's one right way, right or wrong right now. I'm trying to debate you. I'm just saying those are the issues that we brought up when you bring up the moratorium. Okay?
Great, thank you.
That's
I
it.
can't say anything, because it might not be a moratorium. I mean, this helps. It may be the real issue is the hugeness of the houses, rather than like a two-story home or a normal home that was there. Gargantuan.
Yep, and I completely understand. I think, and again, what I'd like to ask of everyone, some of these are very big issues that we
Yeah.
could certainly spend an entire meeting chatting about, and some may very well deserve that. And that's part of what the planning department does with a lot of the community engagement they do, where they find the topics that folks in the town would like to talk about in a larger forum, and we provide that kind of a forum to do so. Happy to provide feedback on the idea of a tear-down moratorium for houses of a certain age or something like that this evening. This evening, again, we're really focused on, for people who are really interested in bringing something to this spring's town meeting, how can we provide you feedback so that if you do want to bring an article forward, you have the feedback from the redevelopment board in order to craft that in a way that takes the at least the start of the feedback that you're going to hear from the redevelopment board. So again, I just
Is it possible to meet with one of you separately then, so I'm not taking up other people's time or something?
Sure. We can certainly do meet with individuals, or again, I really would love to direct you also to the Department of Planning and Community Development, who is fantastic at pulling together some of these. And Claire, I don't know if you want to talk about the different opportunities.
Sure. I mean, my office is always available to answer any questions and help you work through any, of these larger issues. These are conversations that we have constantly as part of our work. In fact, I believe we did a mansionization study within the last 5 or 6 years. It's old now, but maybe that's something we need to dust off and take another look at.
So I just want to, again, I want to explain, share with you all the different vehicles. If this doesn't end up as something for a warrant article that you're interested in moving forward, and I would say this to anybody who's joining us this evening, then we certainly can find another vehicle to explore some of these bigger ideas that you're bringing forth. But I would love to move to the other members of the board so that they can provide you some feedback as well. Shayna, did you have?
Sure. So I just did a very quick skim of the Winchester moratorium that you had referred to, of the zoning article, and a little bit of the history. It appears to me, again, a very quick skim, that what happened in Winchester was strengthening the review around tear-downs and modifications of historic homes, rather than putting a moratorium on tear-downs of a type of house. Now, I think that's a little bit different for a variety of reasons, but one of which is that it creates a little bit more of a, I would say, a thoughtful review. It creates space to look at each individual property and not simply say, this is a small house, a old house, a whatever, and we don't want to tear it down, but rather this is a house that meets certain criteria. Let's take a really good look at it before we take action. Now, the town may have particular goals and priorities around development now. Claire referred to the mansionization study. There are others I know who would likely refer to the work at MBTA with MBTA communities and have sort of different goals and priorities, but I do think the Winchester experience of being thoughtful about looking at sites individually, rather than more of an overarching one-size-fits-all approach might be helpful to think about.
Great. Thank you for that feedback, Shayna. Jean?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, and I think everybody who lives in town has seen older, smaller homes get replaced with larger homes that, because they're new, because they're larger, are more expensive. I've seen it happen in my neighborhood. Unlike you, I can't say that the newer homes are worse looking than the older homes. In some cases, I think they're better looking than the older homes. And I'll agree with what my colleague, Mr. Lau, said. A lot of the older homes are not energy efficient. They were built 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Any new house built in Arlington now must meet incredibly detailed and strict standards on energy efficiency under state law and other laws Arlington has adopted, and have to be fossil fuel free. So even a house that's much larger than an existing house from the 50s is probably going to be much more climate friendly than those older, smaller houses. That said, the zoning bylaw the state zoning law does not allow a city or town to put a limit on the size of a single-family home. So you can't simply say, we're going to limit a home to 2,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet or something like that, because that's clearly prohibited from our doing that. Additionally, there has to be an end to a moratorium, and the moratorium end has to have goals at the end, or else you can't really do a moratorium. So you have to think about, is it 1 year, is it 2? And if it's too long, it's going to get probably stricken down by a court, because at some point, people should be able to do what they want with their property to a certain extent. So how long is the moratorium going to be, and what's the end point? If there is no, we don't know what we're going to do, it's hard to make a good argument for a moratorium like that. So what could you do? You could advocate for larger setbacks, so therefore the houses would have to be smaller. You can advocate for, right now in most single-family neighborhoods, they can be 2.5 stories tall, and they often look like they're 3, but they're 2.5. You could advocate for 2-story high houses, but if you would do something like that and the town would pass it, so many of the existing houses would be non-conforming at that point, and the existing owners would be unable to make some changes to their homes that would make it more non-conforming than they would want to make. So there are some really potentially unintended consequences if you're trying to figure out how to make smaller houses. So one of your issues was smaller. The other issue was expense, right? The way you deal with expense, and they're still going to be expensive, and I'm not advocating this, I'm just asking you to think about it, is let them build 2 houses of small, they're all of a sudden, instead of $2.5 million each, they're going to be $1.5 million each. Very expensive, I couldn't afford it either, but that's one way that one at least lowers the price of some of the buildings that would get built after. Now, it doesn't mean a developer still wouldn't go ahead and build a single-family home rather than a 2-family home, but if the developer thought that it could make more by building 2, even though each one was less money, it might do it. I'm not suggesting that. All I'm saying is, in thinking through bulk, there are unintended consequences with all of that. In thinking through how else do we lower the price, there are some unintended consequences with that, and there are some limits that the town can't go beyond. We can't regulate the size of a single-family home, for example, and you can't have an open-ended moratorium. So those are my comments. And I'm not clear, finally, whether the moratorium would belong in the zoning bylaw or in the general bylaws, and you should probably have a conversation with town council about that.
Great, thank you for the feedback, Jean. Steve?
Yes. Thank you for coming tonight. A few thoughts that you might consider. One is the definition of what you're calling a tear down. So for example, if this is more commonly done in, say, the 2-family homes in East Arlington where the property is, it's got issues or whatever. It's rebuilt basically in the same footprint. But it is new construction, it is very energy efficient, it is more, and it is more expensive. Whether you want, your goal is to prohibit something like that, there should be some thought dedicated to that. Regarding, it would be useful if you could provide an example or examples of places where a moratorium was employed and what the the short-term and long-term effects were. Another consideration is to a person who may have been planning to sell their home during the moratorium period. What is the financial impact of them? And single-family homes in Arlington are expensive. Last year, our average assessed value for a single broke the $1 million mark. This year, it's a little higher. There was a small one that happened to sell last week. It was 1 bedroom, 900 something square feet. It went for something like $830,000. So if the other thing you may want to consider is the $830,000 30 to $1 million is at which a price point that you're trying to hit. And you know, if you're trying to go lower than, if that still seems sort of high, I'm afraid that just sort of land values. It's not often that vacant buildable lots are sold in Arlington, but they typically sell for $750,000 to $850,000, just over the last 2 years. In terms of, smaller dwellings that are less expensive, smaller lot sizes can be an effective way to do this. So things like single-family attached in townhomes. I live in one of the few single-family attached, and it's a 3,000 square foot lot. But there's only so much building you could put on a 3,000 square foot lot, and it works.
Great,
So
thank you,
those
Steve.
are my thoughts to consider.
Great. So I hope that gives you some good starting points for thinking. Great. Thank you very much for bringing this to us. Anyone else have a warrant article proposal that they would like to discuss? Please. And again, if I could ask you to please start by stating your first, last name, and address for the record.
My name is John Hennessy. I'm the owner of property at 17 Palmer Street in South Arlington. I was notified by that there would be an opportunity to address this board to ask that he consider adding my property at 17 Palmer Street to the overlay district for the MBTA. As it turns out, the district overlay stops at the property adjacent to me and does not include my property. I have a 3-family home at that address, and it's situated on the lot that I have a 45-foot clearance from the side of my property to the property division line on that side where the driveways are. I have contacted a Daniel Stager, who's an architect, and addressed with him the possibility of what could be done on this lot that would fulfill the stated hope of the town to add dwelling units. And I am told by my architect that I've contacted that I could conceivably put 3 dwelling units on what I have adjacent to my property if I would not have the setback that I have, if the FAR were that which is in the MBTA district, and if I were to belong to the overlay district. So, if adding additional housing is desirable, I want to be part of that solution. And unfortunate that, as I described my property, I would be able to add those units without tearing down my property, which I would never do, because I've owned it for years now, and I think it's the most, I think it's a very beautiful piece of property as it is, and I will, if allowed, if this board does agree that my property should be added to that district, I do believe and that I would be able to put on in a very attractive and a property that would complement the neighborhood.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Director Rivera, I think you have
I do have a map that shows the location of 17 Palmer Street between Broadway and Mass Ave. This property is adjacent to the neighborhood multifamily overlay. It is immediately adjacent to a parcel that is included in the overlay. It looks like it's also on the other side. Those two parcels must be zoned commercial, otherwise they would have been included.
Great, so I just wanted to, because I don't have any
Yes, of
information,
course.
this is the first time I'm seeing this, I think a couple things that the board would want to see in terms of considering this request. And again, ultimately, town meeting will make the decision. What the board would like to most likely see are the underlying zoning. So what is your property zoned today? You know, obviously there's the map here. And we would then, you know, go through and consider in terms of supporting that, again, to your point, whether there is an opportunity on that lot for redevelopment. But again, we would need to kind of go back through and
Yes.
take a look at the decision-making behind why it was excluded in the first place.
Yes.
And then, and obviously, again, take a look at what the underlying zoning is. So,
I, that's what I'm asking you to do.
right,
The truth is though, that those lots in my neighborhood that are included, no one is gonna take those properties and add units to them. It's just not
Sure.
gonna happen.
sure. So, again, I think it's a little challenging for us to provide a lot of feedback today since this is the first time we're seeing the
Sure.
map and don't have the zoning information here. But if I could ask the other board members to, you know, briefly provide some initial feedback. Steve?
So, you know, I think Ms. Zenberry, the chair, raised a good question, is why was this not included the first time around? And I think that's a good question. But overall, you are adjacent to a parcel that is in the neighborhood multifamily district, and my inclination generally would be to think that the inclusion of an adjacent parcel would make sense. But one procedural thing to look at, in our zoning bylaw, there is, in section 1.5, there is a set of requirements for map changes. And it would require you to make, basically to show that you have sent registered or certified mail to immediate abutters. It's in the bylaw, but it's a procedural requirement. I just want to make sure that you're aware of it.
I will follow the procedures.
Nothing further.
Yeah, and I think the reason Steve brings that up is that can take time.
Oh.
So again, just kind of think about working back from when the hearings typically occur, which will be in March and April this year, and the Department of Planning and Community Development can assist you with, you know, working through that timing.
I'll find out where I have to send the letters.
Exactly. So it's not just where, but when, because we would
Yeah.
hate for you to not be able to move forward with that because of a procedural item.
Thank you, I'll follow up.
Absolutely. That's a good point, Steve. Jean?
Yeah, I agree with what my colleagues had to say. The fact that you're next to a parcel that is already in the overlay district gives you the opportunity. Last year, a property owner whose property was adjacent but not in the district asked, and we recommended that it get added, and town meeting added it, so there is a little precedent for you on that. And I agree, I think it would be very helpful for you to have a conversation with someone in planning now about what you need to do to get the warrant article filed and what you need to do with all the notice requirements so you don't miss any of the deadlines to get to town meeting in
I'll
April.
definitely do that.
And meanwhile, we will need to find out if the reason it wasn't added was just because it wasn't added to the zone, was just because it had to stop somewhere.
Right.
And you have-
Like you're in the
and you
triangle.
have to jump into somewhere.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, it's easier for you to say, just
Right.
extend.
There's no maximum number of units.
No, right.
There
Right.
is a minimum,
Right.
and you met the minimum,
Right.
and
That's right.
I'm not,
Right.
fine.
Right.
Thank you very much for your
Great.
time.
I just want to ask if Shayna, I think that we've covered most of the items. Shayna or Ken, did you have any
Yes.
additional?
Uh,
We'll start with Shayna.
No, I agree with my colleagues, and
Okay, great. Ken.
When you asked your architect to study this, and he said it's three, if you were part of the MBTA community, you could build 3 more units.
I'm finding it difficult to hear you, sir. I'm sorry.
When you hired your architect
Yes,
to study this, he said that if your property was in the MBTA communities,
yes.
you can build 3 more units.
As an add-on to the existing structure, that is correct.
Okay. MBTA communities is, the whole thing about that was increasing some incentives by doing affordable housing or,
Affordable housing was not part of it.
no, not affordable, like more housing and mixed use and businesses, okay, which you get some bonuses from. But the biggest thing about MBTA communities was as of right. Okay, so you didn't have to come to this board to explain why you want to do this. It's as of right, that means you could do it. Right now, did you have your architect study saying, can this be done with a special permit? Could it be done through a variance? And there are other options to do it besides MBTA communities.
I was told that those 2 options are not available to me on my lot because I have a 3-family and it is a non-conforming use in that area.
Fair enough, okay. I just had to ask, I did not know that. Okay?
Great.
And I just want to make sure that was there, okay? And
Before
this-
you go through all this effort.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then I also want to reinforce, there's no slightness of why you weren't part of the communities and why your neighbor is. It just had to be a certain distance from the center line of
I understand
Mass
how
Ave and
things
Broadway, and we try to be fair enough going down that way, and if it fell in, if it didn't fall in, there's no like, who lives here, who does this? There was nothing like that at all. The only time there was an exception is if there was existing business there, if it was a church, or if it was an historic building, we took all that into account. But otherwise, it stayed within that line.
I have no issue about
I
that.
think you-
I
yeah, clear about
realize
that.
the way
Yeah.
things happen.
Great.
Thank
So,
you again.
Absolutely. I think the board would absolutely be willing to consider that. Just let's make sure you
Thank you.
get the information you need from the. Great. Are there any other members joining us this evening who have a proposed warrant article that you would like to discuss with the board? Okay. Thank you for everyone who has joined us this evening to bring up your thoughts. We will now move on to our next agenda item, which is open forum. So if there are any members of the public wishing to speak this evening, if you could please raise your hand, and I will ask you to join us here.
Oh, sure.
Here, please. And again, please introduce yourself by your first, last name, and address, and you will have up to 2 minutes to address the board.
You gonna ready with the timer there?
I'm sorry?
Did you get it
I
ready?
got it.
Okay. Can I ask a procedural question first?
Please
though?
do.
Is there was mention about the overlay, the affordable housing overlay, was that was one of the things that was put up, or?
That was not put up. Yeah, I'm happy to clarify that
Yeah.
before your time starts. Either one is fine. There is a citizen group that is working on a proposal, as I understand it, for a affordable housing overlay district. They, when we put out the call for citizen petitions, they did not indicate that they were interested in presenting this evening. They have come before the redevelopment board in the past, and the redevelopment board has provided feedback, but we have not seen anything in quite some time, but that is not something that we have information to be able to discuss this
But
evening.
would you be approving something that would be kind of going on?
Is this
the
your
warrant?
time? We're
Sure,
now
you
getting
can
into a whole
start. Sure, you
discussion.
can start it, okay.
Okay, so why don't you ask whatever questions you
Sure.
have?
First of all, David Brecht, 55
you.
Norfolk Road. Okay, so the question I just had was just understand more about the affordable housing overlay district. And I know you guys are working kind of separately, so I don't know how this all goes together, but presumably your working group includes Sandra Newton, all those people, would be presenting to the ARB and then getting the sign off of the ARB. Is that correct? You have to get a sign off from the ARB in order to get put as a warrant this year, or just understanding those dynamics?
Sure, I'm happy to clarify the process. Before I do, do you have other questions? Because I'll just address them all.
No, specifically,
at
actually,
one
just kind of
time.
responding
The
to that. 'Cause
process?
I know that there's a little bit of overlap as far as group members and stuff like that, and also just knowing that eventually it's going to come to you and just at least just opining on that.
Sure, absolutely. So the group that's working on the Affordable Housing Overlay District is not a group of this board.
Correct. I get that.
So that is not a board that is reporting to the ARB or that the ARB has any jurisdiction of it. It's a group of citizens. The process by which a warrant article is submitted, that group can submit a warrant article as long as they have the required number of signatures.
And your sign off, correct? I mean,
We do not need to sign off on the warrant article
Okay.
itself. What we will do is during the, there will be hearings once all of the warrant articles are submitted. There will be hearings for every one of the warrant articles that are related to
Got it.
modifications to the zoning bylaws.
Got it, okay.
And at that point, the redevelopment board we will have a hearing and have a discussion with the applicant, and then in our final hearing of all of the zoning bylaw warrant articles,
Okay.
we will either vote to recommend action to the town or recommend no action to the town meeting members
Okay.
as a process. But as long as they have the required number of signatures, they can file a warrant article without having approval of
But
this
it's helpful
board.
to get your sign off.
It's help, again, there's no sign off at this point. It's to receive feedback.
Okay.
So that they understand, generally what are the elements of the article that would be, to work together with the redevelopment board to craft an article that the board feels would be able to be supported and moved to town meeting. And again, we are frequently in front of town meetings, so to be able to
Right.
provide some insight as to these are the types of questions that you're going to receive from the members of town meeting, we would like for you to be prepared. And so we try and help people as they prepare to identify those topics.
Okay, that's
Can I just say, it's
Yeah.
important to remember the distinction between the warrant article and the main motion.
Thank
Right,
you.
so the warrant article would just, I don't know exactly what it would say, because I haven't been following this, but it might say to establish an affordable housing overlay in the town of Arlington. So that would be just a warrant article. They can put that in without our ever seeing it. But then they have to do what the main motion is. How would they actually amend the zoning bylaw to accomplish that? That's the one that they would have to come to us
Okay.
about, and we could give them suggestions, and ultimately, we either, as the chair said, recommend favorable action to town meeting, or recommend no action to town meeting. We also have the opportunity to amend their proposed changes to the bylaws and submit that to town meeting. So the place where we'll all find out what they're proposing is when they file what the main motion is going to look like, and when we have the hearings on all of the zoning articles.
And you would be holding the hearings?
Yes.
This would be under
Correct.
your auspices to
Right.
do that?
Right.
Exactly,
And-
so those will be noticed to the town, and those will be, so that everyone can see on each evening which hearings are being held. And then there will be a separate meeting where we do our final deliberation and vote to provide action or
And this is
Favorable action or
because
no
under
action.
state law, we're both the redevelopment agency and the planning board for the town. And under state law, all proposed changes in zoning have to go through a planning board. That's why we are the process, and the state law says that we make a recommendation to town meeting on each one of them.
Got it.
So we're following the state process.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you very much.
Can I just go with?
Yeah, you're more than welcome if you'd like to.
Just a clarification, like, so,
And again, for the record, just please again state your
Oh.
first, last name and address.
okay, Karen Samuelson, 18 Tower Road.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, just for clarification, the whole overlay, you guys aren't suggesting that that's a group of private citizens?
Correct.
Just private citizens, like they decide to get together and design a huge overlay for the town?
Correct.
Okay, so that's really astounding to me, news. All right, and that was my biggest thing. But this really helps to understand that you try to come up with a warrant, you bring it to you guys, then you kind of counsel, is this written well or not written well, does this make sense? Do you make decisions whether it can go before town meeting or not based on your feelings or
No,
just?
it automatically goes to town meeting. We just make a recommendation that goes along with it.
Meaning,
So one of the things that I think would be helpful for you and for others who might be either joining us or watching as well is that we do have a process document through the redevelopment board site, and perhaps as a follow-up to our meeting minutes, we can publish that again, which goes through this entire process. And so again, anyone can submit a warrant article. If it affects the zoning bylaws, what this board does is we use our expertise and knowledge of the zoning bylaws and understanding the goals of the town, whether it be through the master plan or many of the other documents that we have, as to whether or not we feel that the zoning, that the proposed change aligns with the goals of the town and are in the interest of the town with regard to amending the zoning bylaws.
Okay.
So if we feel that it is not in the interest of the town, we recommend no action, and that goes to town meeting so that they understand that the redevelopment board either recommends moving forward with this, which would be favorable action, or does not recommend going forward with this, which is no
So
action.
the town meeting's not going to vote against you?
Oh, yes, they do.
They can.
They can.
They can. So ultimately, town meeting decides. This board makes a recommendation to
Gotcha.
town meeting.
Okay.
And town
I'm-
meeting could even take our recommendation and make changes to it.
Okay, and I'm sorry, because where do you get all this information? You go onto the town, like to understand all the processes and the deadlines and all that?
Yes, so again, we have a document on the ARB's website which shares this information, but again, we will, what I would suggest is that we attach that to our meeting minutes for this meeting so
Okay.
that it is clear to everybody, and you know, that is pushed to the top.
All right.
There's
so
a lot of
thank you.
information on the site.
That's very helpful, and I'm sorry I wasn't more prepared for this meeting. But I'm trying to understand why the citizens group would want to do a huge overlay, like what are they getting out of it? Like who are they?
Sure. So I'll answer this question and then we're going to move on to
Sure.
to another one. No, that's fine. So they are, actually, Claire, they have worked, I think they've been keeping the Department of Planning and Community Development up to date. So they are a group that's involved in housing within the town. So they are a group that is knowledgeable about affordable housing. Can you
That's
talk
right.
about the makeup
So-
of the group?
Yeah, the group is made up of Arlington residents who are affordable housing professionals and experts, and also members of the town who are extremely interested in developing more housing, especially affordable housing. So this is just a group of people that got together, had the knowledge of, and believe they're looking at other precedents for an affordable housing overlay. They're using some of that, using those as examples, and looking to write one for the town of Arlington.
Are there any developers on that?
I think that when they come in front of us, we absolutely will have a lot more information. And again, I don't have that information. It hasn't been fully presented to the board, so I don't think it would be appropriate for the board to weigh in on
Yeah,
that,
just
not
wondering.
having seen where they are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak this evening at our open forum? Please. And again, if you could please state your name, first name, last name, and address for the record.
Thank you. I'm Carl Wagner, 30 Edge Hill Road in Precinct 15. I'm a town meeting member. I want to thank the board for what looks like progress towards more high-tech innovations. However, I'm speaking loudly because we don't need to hear telephones more, but we do need to hear the voices of you and the people who sit up here. And we still, even in this room, cannot hear you. So please get ACMi to spend some money or the town to spend some money so that there's a proper PA system here, and hopefully that means anyone watching the recordings will hear you, as well as potentially hybrid meetings, since we all know that the select board has been doing hybrid meetings since COVID. And this is, even if it doesn't seem as important to some people, it matters so much for zoning what happens here. So I thank you for your work in zoning. So in addition to needing to fix the environment for people so they can hear and see what's going on, I came in 10 minutes late, and I'm not sure if you discussed something that I heard when I attended the retreat, as the public is allowed to attend the retreats on Saturday. It was mentioned, I think, that the board was going to advance the MBTA density overlay to cover East Arlington, because if I remember the quote, it looks like we're not going to get to do some other kind of zoning in the 2 or 3 years coming. Can I ask you, will you extend the density overlay to all those thousands of people who live in Arlington without a working group? And if you do, since we over-delivered this luxury condo requirement by the state of Massachusetts by 50%, that is, we zoned for 15% more units than we currently have in Arlington, we only need to do 10, would you consider reducing the height and size allowances of the existing MBTA density overlay to allow more parking, more green space, more trees, less shading of people's houses, like another person earlier said is such a problem in Arlington?
Great,
Thank you.
So I can certainly respond to the first question regarding the setup of this room. The redevelopment board has requested multiple times for the HVAC issues to be addressed, and unfortunately, we have not had that resolved. So, and the same with speakers. So we are working with what we have and continue to do so. With regard to
hybrid meetings?
that is not something, again, that this meeting space that the redevelopment board has been given is set up to have. The second question, during the retreat, we had quite a few discussions around potential articles, many of which require, to your point, much more discussion than is potentially available between now and town meeting. The redevelopment board has not identified yet. That will be the work of the first 2 meetings in January. Which articles, which potential warrant articles we will be moving forward to town meeting. So those discussions will be appropriately noticed and will be brought forth for a discussion by the board before moving any of the potential articles that were identified during the board retreat forward as official warrant articles. Thank you.
How can we get hybrid meetings? What do we have to do?
There was, so that everybody knows, there was a study group that was identified. It was actually a task force that was established by town meeting to study the pros and cons and the benefits of hybrid meetings versus in-person meetings versus fully remote meetings. And it was identified that there were certain meetings, such as the redevelopment board, that were most productive in person, and that is what the redevelopment board has decided to do going forward. We have also, as part of that study group, it was identified that there are certain spaces that are appropriately set up within town for hybrid meetings and certain which are not, and in which case in-person meetings are the best methodology for engagement, and the redevelopment board is in that space of both the function of our work as well as the meeting space which we have available to us being most productively set up for in-person meetings. Any other members of the public who wish to make any comments? Please.
I'm Mark Rosenfeld. Call, 62 Walnut Street. I am also a town meeting member. I do remember that there was a committee to look into hybrid meetings. I do not remember exactly what their final report said, but if they did conclude that hybrid meetings were not needed for the redevelopment board, I would quarrel with that, and I'd like to know who I can contact to get that decision reconsidered.
So I was a member of that committee, and that study is a record as of town meeting from the spring of 2022.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
So, do you know who, I mean, do I have to bring a warrant article before town meeting this year in order to get it reconsidered, or who within town?
The board sets our meeting format and time, and this board has decided that we are meeting in person.
Okay, so at this point, it's a decision made by the redevelopment board that the redevelopment board does not want to have hybrid meetings.
The redevelopment board has, because of both the technology available as well as the work that we do and the staff requirements in order to be able to run a successful hybrid meeting for this type of work, has made the decision to meet solely in person.
Okay, is there somebody, perhaps somebody I can sit down with at some other time?
You're more than
discuss
welcome
this?
to discuss that with me at any time.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other topics for this evening? Great. So with that, we will close open forum and turn to new business. I'll turn it over to Director Rickard.
Thank you. Given that we had such productive conversations over the weekend at the retreat, I have no new business at this time.
Great, thank you. So I'll turn it over to the board members for any new business, starting with Steve.
I don't have anything tonight.
All right.
What a surprise.
Steve.
I have
Jean.
nothing.
Sheena?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. So with that, I will see if there is a motion to adjourn.
So motion.
Second,
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve.
Yes.
Jean.
yes.
Shayna.
Yes.
Ken.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.